morning to the Caron YouTube audience. A great good morning to those of you who are here with me in this nicely full auditorium. And good morning to anybody who might be watching around the campus on our live stream closed circuit transmission. I have struggled with the message for today for an obvious reason, because it has to do with loss. It's the one moodiest of my many topics. I first encountered loss as a theme for chapel way before chapel had themes. Sunday, when Father Bill and I were here, he was presiding, and there had been news of deaths in the recent alumni community. It shook the patient community and all of us, and so there's a long tradition of us acknowledging that death is a part of the way families who suffer from addiction must sadly come to survive. And I'm very, very in touch with that. For those on the video you don't know, I just sang a song that was offered at my mother's funeral, and it's in my heart. She got sober before she passed away, although addiction sadly still wins that sort of wrestling match, because nicotine led to lung cancer, which was the principal cause for the death of her life. And I miss my mom tremendously. She died in 1994 as I was several years into my recovery, but headed to seminary, which was the oddest thing in my family. Like Jack going to become a Jesus freak didn't make any sense at all. And but my mom was supportive of it in a lovely way, and I'm really grateful for that. And let me get on track with the outline I finally settled in on as I was coming in this morning, which was first to talk about how I wrestled with death, meaning, life, purpose earlier in my journey of life. I was a person who undertook an undergraduate curriculum in mathematics and physics and music. But the math and physics in particular was, I think, a way that I, as a secularly minded post-Catholic atheist, still wanted to see a world of meaning and connection. And I found it in, I'm going to use big words here to try and impress, of course, but in Einsteinian relativistic mechanics. And if you don't know what that is, but the work of Albert Einstein to sort of upgrade physics, and some of you have taken at least introductory physics and learned about Newtonian mechanics and the trajectories of objects and the gravitational field and all that stuff. I actually found that stuff beautiful. I really was intrigued by it. I pursued knowledge of science. And what happened at a certain point was that science disappointed me with its edges being quite edgy and messy. And so I loved relativistic mechanics. They were beautiful, elegant, profound, simple, not simple, but beautiful and elegant. And astonishingly capable and powerful of describing the movements of the bodies and the heavens that we look at, and the objects that sadly people throw at each other in war, and the tides and all those things. And I just thought the comprehensive utility of these elegant formulas was something, like it meant something to me. I didn't think too deeply about it at the time, maybe, in terms of what I would come to think about later in terms of philosophy and theology, but I loved it. And then Paul Mankiewicz, this really brilliant scientist, lured me into his class, and I learned about thermodynamics. I don't know if any of you have ever studied thermodynamics, but it's depressing as all get out. It describes an aspect of the physical universe that is headed towards chaos. And have you ever heard the term entropy? And it's quite a complicated little area of science, but it's kind of quite miserable. And in one sense, it sort of says the world is headed to bleak. And we sure know that in our political day at the moment, but I'm not supposed to go there, so I won't. Thermodynamics in itself suggests that the order that we see in the universe, I'm reorganized food, you're reorganized food, the world in which we live is stardust. There were old hippie songs about that. But the dynamics of this, even though we're highly organized, and there's something beautiful about how highly organized we are, is that that organization is degrading, and that the ultimate long arc of the physical universe is one of the degradation of the high order that we discover. And you can try and fight against that stream in local areas and local places, but eventually the second law of thermodynamics wins out in the end. And another place where science didn't meet my desire to have science be nice and tidy and even well-nigh at least neutral, if not optimistic, was quantum theory. And when I studied quantum mechanics, like this can't be the right way to describe what's going on at the granular level. But it's certainly been a key piece of our world that brought atom bombs and things, and it continues to be something that is hard to fit together with other parts of science, but really important. And along with that, when I was interested in all that, I would have never told you I was spiritually hungry and seeking in that way, but now I think back and I think I was. I read a little bit about Buddhism in those early years of my drunkenness, and I learned about Buddhist teachings about impermanence, and I didn't like that, but I love like the symmetry of the yin yang. I'm trying to solicit some interest and empathy in but my guess is there are people in the audience who had some of these inclinations in your life. And maybe some of you have had faith all along, which I envy, but I didn't. I was limited to seeking and finding and feeling a sense of resonance when I could see symmetry, when I could see alignment, when I could see some sense of order, when I could see some sense of balance. And then eventually I would know that theoretically there are edges to that, completeness doesn't really lend itself in that area. And all along I had grown up in this family that was affected by substance use disorder. So I was drinking watered down wine when I was just past infancy, and that was normal at the European table where in Brussels I was living. And along this time period of my adolescence and young adulthood, alcohol and drugs played a more and more prominent role. And this too I was not entirely aware of. I would not, if somebody had asked me, was I using to comfort myself against the adversities of life, I probably would have said no, although I might have said, God, that's a depressing question, give me a beer. Now in hindsight, I do realize that and drinking at 5 o'clock, and I found shelter from the storm in substance use. It alleviated something of the dissonances and the difficulties of being a human being out there, especially a young idealistic brat who wanted the world to be ordered and meaningful and come together, and various things happened along the way that were my own personal hurts, and I became more and more hostage to what had been help. So I would be on a trip into international regions, which I was fortunate as heck to be able to be allowed the opportunity to do, and I would have to smuggle drugs with me, afraid that otherwise I would not have intoxicants with me. Even into China, don't tell anybody, or Thailand, the Philippines, Hong Kong. I had a trip like that, and I carried drugs with me. I was 18 years old. It's just tragic, and the fact, because that was more important to me in a way than seeing the things and places that I was going, or at least rivaled that. So I do know I can claim some identification in this area. My privilege is to speak to a Caron-connected community, and that means part of my job is to talk about use disorder and addiction, which I believe is a kind of hostage taking. In other words, I think that at a meta-theoretical level, what we're talking about is an imprisonment, an enslavement, a loss of freedom, a loss of control. And those are phrases that you find even the consummate scientists on the medical sphere of use disorders talk about the hijacked brain, which hijacking sounds like hostage taking to me. So, and I suffered from this, and you would not be in this audience if you or somebody close to you has not fallen prey to this. And what is it that moves me to be able to be here as a person who found release from that captivity? And now when the manure hits the ventilator in my life, I don't need Johnny Walker. I don't go buy an 8-ball. I don't try to find out how I can supplement my medicine cabinet with things that I would buy on the street. And I'm happy to say I'm not putting myself at risk of a fentanyl surprise and overdose and death by that path. We're all going to die, and I've come to recognize that. And the longer I live, the more I am grateful that the guy who was looking for the deep answers and meaning in his life in Newtonian and Einsteinian mechanics didn't stop there. I'm glad it all happened. I'm glad I became imprisoned to Johnny Walker Red. That was my primary alcohol choice. I'm glad that something happened in my life to make me become a part of a new solution set. And what I was explaining, it's not like a rational decision and explanation, but as I started receiving the freedom of not drinking one day at a time, I started being able to paste in an explanation of what had happened to me and what was happening and what my next choices could be now that I had choice back in my life. And what I was told early on was that the analytical atheism could be a source for a spiritual solution, but that in any case, I needed to find something like guardrails to hold on to because life is difficult, would continue to be difficult, and I was going to face adversity, and I would have cravings and temptations in the future that would previously have been answered with substance use, and that I was going to want something, someone, some things to rely on. And I do believe that to be the case. I believe it's the general case. I don't think that those of us who have been around substance use disorder and its entrapment are the only people who sort of need good handrails, and go it alone anonymous is the unwise move in my mind in general in life. And unfortunately, I think we live in a culture that implies that that's an authentic and adequate solution. And I think that's cause of a great amount of our social and personal ills. But for me, this was this thing. I was suddenly able to not drink and not use, and I had a community of people who were not drinking and not using, and they described something that happened to them, this spiritual awakening thing, and they encouraged me to explore it, and in a gentle and loving way said, there are answers out there for you to find. You don't need to find our answer, but go ye and seek, and you'll do better looking for healthier solutions than the one in the bottle. Look in spirit rather than spirits, right? Every time I see a store, the wine and spirits store, I think, God, isn't that funny? Because I was looking in the spirit store, now I need to look in the spirit cabinet, right? And I mean by that not the liquor cabinet. So this is how I ended up going to seminary, and this is how I ended up being in front of you wearing an interfaith stole this morning, and this is how, I would tell you, this is how in the face of various adversities, since 1989 when I had my last intentional drink or drug, that I have maintained my abstinence is by new reliance, new comfort, new security. And I would love to tell you that I found a way to rely on the material world and the physical reality and and I would love to tell you that I figured out permanence and solidity in this zone, but the Buddhists and the great teachers of the poetic and musical traditions all acknowledge the impermanence of life, right? And that the fragility of our existence. And I could never forget the thermodynamic thing. The world is headed to chaos and disorganization, inevitably. But what happened, I'm watching my time, but I'm going to be a little bit liberal with it. So I suffered in various ways. Bad things happened as I was sober, and I got more and more connected to the community that now I think it was Alcoholics Anonymous, but it had different flavors and forms at different times. I had a brother who died. His death was tragic, awful. It should have gotten more of my attention, but I kind of didn't really feel it as fully as I would later in my sobriety. And then my mom's illness as I was headed to seminary and death. That really did grip me in a way that caused me to wrestle with what I believed in. And I ended up going to seminary, and which, like I said early on this morning, people in my family thought was the weirdest thing that I would do. And yet I felt compelled to go in seeking answers to questions that I could not seem to answer in the science books or in the late night TV. And one of the assignments I had was assigned to me by a man who had taken an interest in me when I came through the seminary ordination track. His name was John Mitchell. And John told me, he allowed me to become a student pastor in a church where he was serving. People were like, you're a what? And I was like, yeah, I'm a student pastor. And then John said to me, I want you to go to this place. It was called the Manor House. I'm sure it still exists. It was in the not-so-thriving little town of Seaford, Delaware. And the Manor House is a retirement, assisted living, and end-of-life care place. It's where people finish their course of their journey, if they can afford to buy in before and with long wait. Anyway, John said to me, I want you to go to the Manor House, and I want you to go to the assisted living and the dementia ward. And I want you to take these people communion that was consecrated on Sunday. I want you to go either Sunday afternoon, Monday, and then Tuesday. I want you to visit our folks in the assisted living and Alzheimer's unit. The folks in the regular community can come to church or there's a service that they can attend, but these folks have become disconnected from our faith community and its life. And I felt completely unprepared to do this. I was 32 years old or something like that, and I'm like, you want me to do that? And he's like, yes. So I was like, what do I do? And he said, here's some Bible basics, here's some basic hymns, here's some stuff, and here's the things you say when you give people communion in that setting. And I was like, yes, sir, I'll go do it. It turned out to be life-transforming for me. Because, like the song I sang before this, something happened in those moments. There was a guy, his name was Clarence. I won't tell you his last name, although he's passed away, and I'm not sure anyone in his family would be mad if I blew his anonymity, but I feel a desire to protect his story. And Clarence was not yet in the Alzheimer's wing. These things happened in the Alzheimer's wing too, but Clarence was so interesting to me. He'd been an engineer. He was a scientist. He identified as an atheist. And then here's this young Pastor Jack coming wandering in with communion saying, hello, Mr. Clarence, blah, blah, blah. I understand that you've been connected to our church, and I'm here to represent the church. And I started visiting Clarence on a regular basis because I learned that no one visited him. None of his kids, none of his grandkids, no one came to see this really lovely man. And there were one or two pictures that were in this very austere, super clinical, depressing environment that were the last echoes of the life he had lived. And Clarence and I would talk about what I would do next. After I would visit him, I would go into the dementia ward, and I would take the communion that I was bringing to Clarence, and he was trying to be nice to me, so he took communion with me. But
then I'd go into the dementia ward, and there would be, I remember this one woman, her name was, I think, Mrs. Parker, but don't hold me to that, and I don't remember what her first name was. These folks could not even really remember, many of them, their names. But the wildest thing would happen is I would say, I'm here, I'm from St. John's, came to bring you communion, and when you present communion in the Christian traditions, you say the body of Christ. And this person who was going beyond the veil, right, just like almost inaccessible to anybody else, would say, Amen, and open their mouth. Or, and it made me realize that this sacrament was drilling through the dementia overlay and touching something at the profoundest core of these people. And I started doing this thing. I started doing a little service in the Alzheimer's ward, which people thought was nuts. But I would have, and the nurses helped me, and they'd be like, do you want me to, and I finally, what happened is Mrs. Parker, they were like, well, you could take her into her room, but, she's there in the common area. And I said, can I just do this in the common area? And they're like, do whatever you want, we don't care. And so I started, readings, prayers, music, and we would sing something like, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. And people who had not opened their mouths for weeks or months could barely articulate, and were suddenly singing with me. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch, and I come to the garden alone while the dew is still. These songs were a medium of interconnectedness between myself and these persons who appeared to me to be quite lost, and were in my mind on the threshold of whatever would be next, that of course I cannot assuredly tell you about one way or the other. But they changed me to decide all of my crap about the anthropomorphic imaging of a deity, just like when people talk about Jesus as if Jesus is God, and Charlton Heston figures in the clouds with lightning bolts or whatever, which all that bothered me, to some degree still bothers me, except that it became a conduit for me to a solution to life's difficulties that I saw people on the very cusp of losing their mortal existence able to cling to. And it was remarkably converting for me. It made me want to have a feeling of this, what I learned in seminary was called assurance, to know that I know that I know, that I will not, in the end, be entirely and purely and solely consigned to dust, right? That thermodynamics might win with the shell of who I am, but that love and meaning and hope and belonging are not necessarily to be taken from me. If it still existed in Mrs. Parker and could be reached into through this sacrament and prayer and song, then it looked like it was going away, but it was still there. I came to see this death thing as threshold and not brick wall, and to find comfort in the faith that had been handed down for thousands of years. And all of a sudden I had this moment, I'm like, gosh, what is the hubris in me? What is this childlike arrogance, brash pride that thought I would figure out better how to solve the problems of the suffering of life than people who had lived for thousands of years? So I'm like, oh gosh, yeah, that was really arrogant of me. I thought my parents were stupid. I thought people who wear clothing like this were stupid. I thought, I still struggle with institutions in many ways. But these things that have been handed down for centuries, and Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, all these wisdom traditions, I have come to realize have their ways of offering us a vision of ultimate connectedness. I did a wedding on Friday with a friend who's a recovering nerd like me, and we used Buddhist prayers, and we talked about his wedding as a punctuation, like a semicolon between the past and the future, and that what was happening was that he and his bride, as impermanent beings, were interweaving their lives together. That the moment of their marriage was a meaningful transitional moment. And where I wanted to finish today was to ask you to conceive of daylight savings time 2022 Sunday morning as a transition for you if you seek one. That where you were when you came in the door need not be how you understand who and what is ahead for you after. And that my testimony would be that there is an abiding, there is a connectedness, there is something beyond the transient that you can experience and feel and see. It's love. And it manifests here on Magic Mountain all the time. In a few minutes, we're going to do a memorial acknowledgement of somebody who is here who has passed away, but struggled to sustain sobriety. And we're going to celebrate, I hope we have an anniversary down here, somebody who's sustaining recovery. And to me, like, you don't see sustained recovery without love. You don't see sustained recovery without miracle. And the love is the in-breaking, like the sacrament of the song, of something more than mere material. So that's as ooh as I like to get. And I don't know if you feel it, but I feel it. I feel a sense that I have conjured for me in front of you that idea that in the songs that we share, the readings that we have, and the moments that will happen in the next hour, 50 minutes, we will experience something beyond the ordinary. So may